some operatives breaking into the DNC headquarters to rifle through a filing cabinet. It sounds quaint today.
Well,
It
yeah,
sounds like nothing.
it's definitely dwarfed by what Edward Snowden revealed 5 years ago. One of my favorite things that Snowden put out was that the NSA has something called X key score, which they can target individuals and vacuum up all their email. And it's very flexible as far as what they can target people for. If someone is searching for suspicious stuff on the web, boom, the NSA can vacuum up their email. So if someone's looking at Mises, yeah. But I mean, there was some hubbub on this. Snowden got some credit; he deserved a hell of a lot more. But this is not an issue in D.C. Because the government wins. So,
how do you think we get out of it? In other words, to make society less politicized, less rancorous, we have to make politics matter less, which means we have to reduce the size and scope of the state. The state's been going the other direction. How do we get out of this? How do we ratchet it down?
Well, people need to realize that the government is one of their most dangerous enemies. And people still have this blind faith that government is going to do them good. That's part of the reason for the increased faith in socialism. Folks think that vesting vast arbitrary power in politicians who lied to win office, that these same folks are going to turn around and do you, confer vast benefits on you, aside from canceling your student debt. There is a naivety there. I mean, it's frustrating to me to see the conservatives, see a lot of the GOP clamoring in favor of tariffs and torture. At the same time, a lot of the Democrats are clamoring in favor of censorship and socialism. And it's indicative. I mean, there was only a few years ago we were hearing about the arrival of the libertarian moment. And I'm thinking, I hope you had a stopwatch, with very finely tuned, because otherwise you missed it. And I don't think people realize how incredibly bad a lot of these terms of the political debate have turned against people who like freedom. Because, again, the torture, tariffs versus censorship and socialism, and either one of those is vesting vast arbitrary power. And, if people haven't learned to distrust politicians by this point, I almost get cynical about their learning curve.
But, at the Mises Institute, we talk a lot about political subsidiarity, about decentralization, about breakaway movement, secession. And we get a lot of grief for this. People say, oh, no, they want a universal libertarianism, not just in ethics or normative aspects that Rothbard talks about, but a universal political libertarianism. And I look at the landscape and I say, it's just a long way off. It takes 70 million votes to win the U.S. presidency, for example. Ron Paul and Rand Paul were getting 2-3% in some primaries. So, Mises had this great quote where he basically says, having to belong to a state as a member, as a citizen, of which one does not wish to belong, is no different if it's the result of an election or an invasion. In other words,
that's a great quote.
In other words, a lot of people on the left today, a lot of progressives feel like they are under occupation by the Trump regime. That may seem hysterical, but nonetheless, they feel it. But both sides just want this overarching top-down victory where they control the Supreme Court, they control the House, the Senate, they control the administration, and they sort of lord it over the other side. But nobody wants to talk about, what do we do with politically vanquished people? What do we do with that 30 or 40% that has to lose? I mean, even today in the former Soviet Union, there are old people who pine for the communist days, who think it's better. Politically vanquished people don't just go away. So what do we do with them? I mean, what do the two sides say? Should they die? Should they be killed? Should they be put in camps? I mean, nobody wants to talk about this, but yet subsidiarity, federalism, secession is the humane approach to dealing with what seems to be these intractable differences in worldview.
Yeah, I think far more of a federal system would be good if people want to secede. Maybe they'll go better than it did in 1861. There are a number of parts in this country where there's a mass of folks who have a lot more affection for individual liberty than the average American, and those folks should be able to get the breathing room. I mean, I guess part of the reason I'm not optimistic right now is that there have been so many government outrages in recent decades, and it seems as though there was almost a status sea change after 9/11. That so many Americans completely lost their bullshit radar in politics. Government was put on a pedestal. For a lot of Americans, it's still there. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many butts and boobs the TSA squeezes for no reason. It doesn't matter how many government wiretap schemes are exposed. It doesn't matter how many bogus wars that we help launch abroad. Iraq, Libya, Syria. There's this faith in the government, almost like a supreme protector. So as long as people have that blind faith, it's hard for me to see how any solution is going to work. But I mean, it's great y'all are trying, and I'm certainly plugging away with my articles and stuff. But it's hopefully things get better.
Well, I want to talk about Barack Obama a little bit too, because we've spoken at length about Donald Trump. But you had an article in USA Today, I believe, just a week or so ago, saying that Obama was no angel when it comes to some of the rifts that we're dealing with now in the post-Obama era.
Yeah, well, it's funny to see the media attempting to put a halo back over his head, betray him as a savior. It's almost like we're going back to the campaign poster in 2008, which portrayed him as Jesus. But keep in mind, this is someone who ran on a peace platform and bombed 7 nations. This is someone who, as a candidate, was opposed to warrantless wiretaps were illegal, and he expanded the NSA wiretaps, and then he lied about it after Snowden exposed it. This is someone who claimed to have a respect for, the Constitution, separation of powers, but when Congress did not kowtow, he relied on bureaucratic bulldozing, as the New York Times said, and these endless executive orders, and his guidance letters on practically everything. I mean, that was just bureaucrats pulling stuff out of the back of their pockets and dictating to America and causing havoc far and wide. It's interesting to see the myth of Obama, because he was not an effective president. He was rolled on a lot of different issues. He cast his principles overboard very quickly. President Obama helped make America an impunity democracy in which the rulers can do whatever they please.
Yeah. So in that sense, there was no hope and change. There was just a continuation of executive authority. Last question for you. You've also written something lately about the sainted John McCain. I wonder how much the foreign policy mentality that he personified, the U.S. empire, I wonder how much of that sort of denudes our spirit at home and makes us more accepting of government excesses at home domestically.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the real takeaways from the funeral service at the National Cathedral was
that was about a week's worth of funerals, if I remember.
Yeah, there was someone commented on online that it only took 3 days for Jesus to be crucified, buried, and rise again. But here we are in the 8th day of John McCain's eulogies and funerals. It was fascinating to see almost the entire DC establishment, just close ranks and shed bogus tears and all that. But certainly, John McCain unleashed a lot of foreign policy poison. It was encouraging in 2000, the primaries, when George W. Bush trounced McCain, who was jabbering about his rogue state rollback, which I was pleased to see a lot of Americans realize was this complete idiocy and dangerous nonsense. After 9/11, George Bush adopted that, and we've been up Schitt's Creek ever since. Well,
Jim, I appreciate you coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not familiar with Jim Bovard, you need to be. You can find him at jimbovard.com, Gimbovard. You can find him in The Hill frequently. You can find him, I want to say, maybe every other week in USA Today. And you'll also find him on Twitter, so be sure to follow him and have a great weekend. Thank you, Jim.
Subscribe to Mises Weekends via iTunes U, Stitcher, and SoundCloud, or listen on Mises.org and YouTube.